Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're getting into something that, well, it feels less like an aspiration these days and maybe more like an obligation. Hustle culture. We've all seen it, right? This relentless promotion of constant activity, the idea that grinding harder always equals more reward. But, what happens when that drive actually becomes destructive?
Yeah. Today we're trying to move past just the slogans, the surface stuff. You've shared some really interesting material with us that looks at the real fallout of this always-on mentality.
Right.
What some people are calling the hustle lie and, the burnout cycle it tends to fuel.
Yeah.
So our aim today is really to unpack where this pressure comes from, understand the dangers, and crucially maybe explore what we can actually do about it for you, the listener.
Exactly. The mission here is to give you the insights to make, informed choices.
Okay.
About your own well-being, your relationship with work, and to really get the stakes. I mean, think about that story you shared, the 28-year-old tech founder.
Oh, yeah. That was dark.
After just pushing herself relentlessly, 18-hour days, selling her startup. Her body it gave out, it shut down. And that's not just like a warning. It's a really clear picture of the human cost of taking hustle to the extreme.
And it's not just happening in, Silicon Valley or places like that. We're seeing these unsettling echoes globally. Think about Japan's karoshi.
Death by overwork.
Yeah, literally death by overwork. And then you see these emerging kind of similar trends, maybe surprisingly, in Kenya's gig economy.
Right.
And even reports about Gen Z quiet quitting. Not just their jobs, but sometimes even spiritual stuff. It suggests this widespread exhaustion, maybe, a reaction to relentless pressure in all parts of life.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Where does this intense drive even start? Does it have historical roots?
Well, it's fascinating when you look back. One way to think about modern hustle culture, perhaps, is like a Protestant work ethic 2.0.
Okay. Explain that a bit.
It's this, deeply ingrained idea, but now sort of supercharged in our digital age, that hard work isn't just about achieving things. It's tied to our inherent value, almost a path to, maybe not salvation, but some kind of worldly validation.
That definitely clicks with what you hear a lot, doesn't it? This constant message that you need to earn your success. Anything less than total dedication is, a personal failing.
Exactly.
Based on the sources, can you give us a more concrete historical example? How did this play out before, say, the internet?
Sure. Think back to the 19th century British piecework factories.
Ah, okay.
Workers got paid for each specific task they finished. Sounds efficient, maybe. But the key thing here is how that system could lead to this dangerous internalizing of productivity as self-worth.
Right. You are what you produce.
Pretty much. And this history shows how easily these external incentives can flip into self-exploitation. It's a pattern that, looks alarmingly similar to today's gig economy platforms, right? Where individuals often feel pushed to take on just excessive workloads to make ends meet, blurring all the lines between work and life.
That's a powerful link, how external pressure drives internal.
Yeah, exploitation.
Exactly.
What about less obvious historical threads? Anything else that might have shaped this mindset?
Well, if we connect the dots, maybe consider the influence of post-World War II productivity propaganda.
Propaganda, like Rosie the Riveter.
Or
something else.
A bit different, maybe more subtle. Think about those 1950s ads. The ones idealizing constant domestic labor for women. The housewife who's always smiling while cleaning and cooking.
Oh, yeah. Those seem so dated now.
They do, but while they might seem harmless, they arguably contributed to this kind of lingering societal guilt, a feeling of never doing enough, even outside of paid work. It subtly reinforced this idea that constant activity or constant productivity was the norm, and anything less was somehow lacking. It's like this background hum suggesting we should always be on, always occupied. Okay, so let's shift to how this plays out now globally. We mentioned the tech founder, but the sources you looked at had other really sobering examples of burnout.
Yeah, the individual stories really hit home. Consider that Kenyan Uber driver working 16 hours every single day.
16 hours. Why?
Just to afford his diabetes medication. Yeah. That's what one source highlighted. And the disconnect between that glossy rhetoric, be the CEO of your own hustle.
Right.
And the harsh reality of his precarious work, maybe earning just $3 an hour, it's just stark. It really shows the vulnerability baked into a lot of the gig economy.
Absolutely. A world away from the empowering image sometimes projected. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, right? The intense pressure and high-stakes corporate jobs.
Exactly. That anecdote about the former Goldman Sachs analyst is, Well, it's telling.
What happened there?
The fact that colleagues were literally given sleep kits to keep under their desks during intense IPO periods, that says a lot about the expectation of just constant work.
Wow. Sleep kits.
Mm-hmm. And his decision to leave after seeing a colleague actually hospitalized from exhaustion, it just hammers home the extreme human cost in those kinds of pressure cooker environments.
It really makes you wonder if all this relentless work, these crazy hours, actually leads to better results. I think your sources mentioned something called the productivity paradox. What's that about?
Yeah, that raises a really critical question, doesn't it? Does working more hours automatically mean more output? The productivity paradox basically suggests often no.
Really?
Yeah. Countries like Mexico, for instance, they tend to have some of the longest average working hours globally. But surprisingly often, they show lower GDP output per capita compared to countries with shorter hours.
Huh.
So it challenges that fundamental assumption. More time in higher productivity. It's not always true.
So grinding harder doesn't necessarily mean more success, objectively speaking. That's a really important point. Were there specific examples that kind of showed this disconnect in the material you looked at?
Yes, definitely. A 2023 ILO report you shared pointed to a productivity plummet in hustle-driven startups.
Right, you'd think startups would be models of productivity.
You'd think.
Yeah.
But despite the long hours, the intense pressure cooker vibe often found in startup culture, the actual innovation and output can apparently suffer. And this contrasts really sharply with experiments like those in Sweden. They tried out 6-hour work days, and they actually saw a boost in innovation and employee well-being. It suggests that, rest and a more balanced approach might actually be better for real productivity.
That's so counterintuitive to the hustle message, but it makes a lot of sense. It's about the quality of the hours, maybe, not just the sheer quantity. Okay, let's pivot a bit. What is all this constant pressure actually doing to our brains? You mentioned the neuroscience of burnout.
Yeah, this part is fascinating and kind of scary. Think of something called cognitive debt. It's like the brain's version of financial debt.
Okay.
Chronic stress, chronic overwork, it depletes crucial neurotransmitters. Things like dopamine,
Which we need for
motivation, focus, feeling pleasure. When these resources get constantly drained, it leads straight to those feelings of exhaustion, cynicism, reduced thinking ability.
Oh.
Basically, the hallmarks of burnout.
So it's not just, I feel tired, it's an actual depletion, a chemical thing in the brain.
Exactly. It's physiological.
And I remember seeing something in the material about brain scans, fMRI.
Yes. So 2023 fMRI research gave us some pretty compelling pictures. fMRI, it let scientists see brain activity.
Right.
And scans of people dealing with chronic overwork showed hyperactivity in the amygdala.
The amygdala, that's the fear center, right? Stress response.
That's the one. And interestingly, this pattern of hyperactivity, it looked very similar to what doctors observe in individuals with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow, that comparison to PTSD is powerful and pretty unsettling. It really underlines how serious burnout is.
It does. It shows the profound neurological impact. It's affecting the brain's actual structure and function.
Okay, so the damage is real. Is there anything we can do to counteract this neurological toll? You mentioned something called strategic laziness. I have to admit, I like the sound of that.
Huh. Yeah, it sounds good, doesn't it? The idea behind strategic laziness is basically that deliberately scheduling downtime, unproductive time, can actually be a really powerful tool.
How so?
It helps restore neuroplasticity. That's the brain's amazing ability to reorganize itself, form new connections. Yeah. Think of it as giving your brain a chance to just rest and reset.
So like scheduled breaks.
Even more than that, even short blocks of time, say 20 minutes of just daydreaming or literally doing nothing. Yeah. That can allow the brain to recover consolidated information and ultimately make you more focused and creative later on.
Yeah.
It's not really about being lazy. It's about being strategic with managing your cognitive energy, your brain's resources.
So intentionally doing nothing can actually make us more productive in the long run. That just turns the whole hustle narrative completely upside down.
It really does.
Okay, now let's talk about the environment that often fuels this relentless drive. Your sources pointed to the commercialization of the hustle ethos. What exactly does that mean?
This is where it gets really tangled, I think. Hustle culture isn't just, a personal mindset anymore. It's become deeply embedded in this massive multi-billion-dollar, one source called it the shame industrial complex.
Shame industrial complex? Wow. What does that include?
It includes that huge self-help industry, which, often starts with good intentions, probably. but it can inadvertently end up perpetuating burnout.
By making you feel like you're not doing enough.
Exactly. By framing constant striving, sometimes even exhaustion, as like necessary steps on the path to enlightenment or success. There's this undercurrent, this message that if you're not constantly optimizing, constantly improving, you're somehow failing, falling behind.
Yeah, it definitely resonates. You see it everywhere. The constant barrage of self-improvement advice, programs, gurus, all promising the secret to unlocking your potential, usually by pushing yourself to the absolute limit.
Precisely. And take the whole phenomenon of 5 a.m. club culture.
Oh, yeah, that's huge online.
Right. And while, look, a structured morning might be great for some people, it's often pushed really aggressively by influencers who actually profit from glorifying sleep deprivation.
How do they profit?
They sell courses, books, content, all promising these miracle mornings to an audience that's probably already exhausted. So it often just creates more pressure instead of actually helping.
It's like the supposed solution becomes another part of the problem, and it's not just about work productivity anymore, is it? I think you mentioned something called spiritual hustle.
Yes, that's another layer. This pressure to optimize ourselves has even crept into the wellness space.
Seriously, how?
We're seeing the rise of what some call spiritual hustle. Things like meditation marathons, intensive breathwork retreats. They get commodified, packaged and sold as yet another way to level up your life.
Ah, I see.
So instead of being tools for genuine rest or well-being, they kind of become another set of demands, another layer of pressure to constantly improve, constantly optimize, even in the areas that are supposed to be about rest and rejuvenation.
So even trying to find balance can turn into another form of striving. Wow. It feels like a bit of a trap. But are there signs of people pushing back? Did your sources show any emerging alternatives, solutions?
Yes. Thankfully. What's encouraging is seeing some companies, and individuals too, starting to seriously question this relentless chase for more.
Like what?
Well, consider the example of that slow productivity startup mentioned in the material.
Slow productivity, okay.
Their whole approach was different. They implemented a results-only work policy, meaning no fixed hours, unlimited paid time off, a 4-day work week. Focus on the outcome, not the hours clocked.
And did it work financially?
Amazingly, yes. It apparently led to a significant 200% profit growth within just 2 years.
Wow. 200% growth with fewer hours?
Exactly. It really demonstrates that a different approach can be not just sustainable for people, but actually really good for the bottom line too.
That's a super compelling data point. Directly challenges that old belief. More hours, more output.
Right.
And didn't that startup also create some kind of practical tool? A burnout audit. How does that work?
Yeah, they developed this burnout audit. It seems pretty straightforward, actually. 2 key steps.
Okay.
First, track the time you spend on what they call performative work.
Performative work, like?
Things like, answering emails that don't really need answering, sitting in pointless meetings, stuff that doesn't actually lead to meaningful outcomes but makes you look busy.
Right, we've all done that. And the second step?
Second, identify instances of productivity theater.
Productivity theater?
Yeah. Tasks you might do mainly just to appear busy, rather than because they're genuinely valuable or necessary. By just becoming aware of where your time and energy are really going, especially on these drains, the idea is you can start to reclaim your focus and cut out some of that unnecessary effort.
That sounds like a really practical, actionable first step for anyone feeling, swamped. But what about resistance? Do these kinds of balanced approaches face pushback? I can imagine some investors might be like, what? No all-nighters?
Oh, absolutely. You're right. There can definitely be initial pushback. The CEO of that slow productivity startup, she mentioned that some investors were initially quite skeptical.
Yeah.
Asking things exactly like that. No all-nighters. You're not serious. That kind of attitude.
Right.
But the company's actual success, the real-world results, plus they had a 0% employee attrition rate. Nobody was leaving.
0%. That's incredible.
Isn't it? It really speaks for itself. It shows that prioritizing well-being can actually lead to a more engaged, more stable, and ultimately more productive workforce in the long run.
It really feels like a fundamental shift is needed, doesn't it? In how we define work, how we define success, moving away from just looking busy towards, actual results and sustainable effort. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the single most important thing you'd want our listener to take away from all this?
I think the key thing really is this. Burnout should not be seen as a badge of honor. It's not some necessary rite of passage on the way to achieving your goals.
Right.
Pushing yourself to the point of utter exhaustion. It's just not sustainable. And frankly, it's not even the most effective path to long-term success or, maybe more importantly, personal fulfillment.
Well said. And maybe on a practical note for you listening, perhaps try one small act of what we could call lazy protest this week.
Lazy protest. I like it.
It doesn't have to be huge. Maybe just delete one productivity app that's stressing you out. Or allow yourself a proper midday break, maybe even a nap, without feeling guilty. Or even just practice offering a simple, polite no to an unreasonable request. Sometimes these small acts of resisting that constant pressure to do more, to hustle, they can actually feel quite significant.
And maybe this whole discussion raises a bigger question for you to think about, in your own time.
What's that?
How can we, individually and maybe even collectively, redefine what success and fulfillment actually mean to us in a way that genuinely values our well-being, that values sustainable effort over just this relentless, often exhausting striving?
That's a really good question, something definitely worth pondering.